If you want to paint more realistically, the thing that you need to pay most attention to is not necessarily the colors that you choose, but it's more important to pay attention to value. And if you're not quite sure what value means, or if you know what values are, but you're just not really certain how to use them in your painting, then I want you to follow along with this tutorial. We're going to be doing this simple, basic little mug. Now mine is blue. You can choose whatever color you want to make yours. It really doesn't matter. The thing that we're focusing on is how to see where your lightest lights are, your darkest darks, and then everything that falls in between those. One of the reasons I chose a mug is because it's cylinder in shape. So you're going to be painting something that has a round effect to it. And you're going to instantly see how using value over color is going to create a realistic, three-dimensional, rounded looking mug. So I hope that you will follow along with this really quick tutorial, and let me know in the comment section below when you're done what you learned from it. And if you have any questions about it, shoot them out there. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. And before I forget, I want to make mention that I have a watercolor course coming out on this very same subject, and that is painting more realistic. The name of it is Watercolor Realism, The Rose. So if you enjoy painting this blue mug with me today, and you want to go deeper into learning more about how to use values to create more realism in your paintings, be sure to check out the link in the description box below. Right now you can get on the waiting list, but this course is right on the verge of being available. I'll see you inside this blue mug tutorial. So we're going to go ahead and jump in and start on the cup. Now you can see that I already have the handle done. That could be a lesson for another day. It's just a simple black handle that has a highlight in it. So what we want to do first is put our water down. And while I'm letting that water settle into my paper, I'm going to tell you what colors I'm using. Now keep in mind that you can use any color you want. My cup just happens to be blue, so I am using blue. But of course you can make it green, yellow, red, whatever color you like. And when you're putting your water on your paper, you want to make sure that you get it really good and drenched. And you don't want it so wet that if you picked it up and tilted it, it would just run right across your paper and off. But you want it wet enough so that you have a nice glossy sheen. I'm going to tilt it up in a minute so that you can see it. And you even want enough so that when you tilt it up, you might see a little bit of puddling on the side that's leaning down. But like I said, it should not have so much that it runs off your paper. I've got a nice even wash of water, and see how shiny that is, and you'll probably even notice that I have a little bit of puddling right down in here, but there's not so much water on it that it's running off the edge of my paper. So I'm just going to spread that back around and make sure that this whole area is evenly wet and the shine is the same everywhere. You want to avoid having a super wet shiny spot here and then looking down somewhere else and it be kind of dull and headed toward dry. So the colors that I'm using are phthalo blue, this is the red shade. I also have some nickel azo yellow and some sepia. So what I have here is a mixture of my phthalo blue with a tiny bit of yellow and some sepia. And then this is the same mixture, but I put a little more sepia in it just to darken it up. And that's what I'm going to end up using as my shadow color. So I'm going to give this just a little more time to not be as shiny. I want it to have a sheen, but I want it to look more like a stainless steel or a satin type of a sheen, not a really glassy, high gloss kind of sheen. So I'm going to give this a few seconds, keep an eyeball on it, and when it gets to where it needs to be, I will come back and we're going to put our first wash of color down. Let me show you what it looks like now. So see, it still has an even shine all over it. However, I don't have a bunch of puddling going on. So I've got my brush nice and wet. I have thinned down my paint just a bit because I don't want it to go on too dark. Right now, what we're needing to do is really put our lightest blue in place. But I want to build up these layers, and I do that by putting my lightest wash down, and then we'll come back in and we're going to add some color in other washes and darken this up. What we're going to do this time is basically the exact same thing. I'm going to get the whole cup wet with just clean water, and then I'm going to add color to it again because this side needs to go slightly darker, and of course this side needs to go much darker. So we'll begin with just adding water. I've got my water on it. It's puddling up just a wee little bit down there. So I'm just going to use my brush to distribute that out. I'm going to come in here into the original color, and I'm going to let gravity do a little bit of work. So I'm going to flip this around, and I'm going to hold my board at an angle. I'm going to take my paint, just like I did before, and I'm going to put it onto the cup. But see how by tilting this up a little bit, the paint is running downhill. Now you don't have to tilt it up a lot. I've got mine degrees wise, I couldn't tell you, but I would say it's a couple, maybe 2.5, 3 inches above my work surface up at the top. So it doesn't need much of a tilt for this paint to run over here to this side. Another thing that this does is it also helps to create a really smooth wash. Now I've got some water puddling up here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry my brush and then just soak some of this excess water up, because if I leave that, then I'm going to end up with a hard edge, and I don't want a hard edge. Now I'm going to turn this back around, and I'm going to grab some of my darker color while I'm right here. And the consistency of this paint right now is more like, I would say, like skim milk. I don't know if I said it when I was painting the first wash. I don't think I did. But if you don't know what that term means when I say skim milk, then you can check out my YouTube channel for, the title is called From Tea to Butter. And it teaches you the different consistencies of your paint, and all that is how much water to paint ratio you have, and you just kind of compare it to a tea or a coffee or milk or cream or butter. So it's fairly easy to figure out once you look at that little tutorial that I have for you. So I've got that darker color on, and I'm bringing a little bit more in because this cup gradually goes from being pretty light on this right-hand side to getting fairly dark here. And then there's a little bit of reflected light on the left-hand side that when I took this photo, my cup was sitting close to a light color wall. So it's the sunlight bouncing off that wall and then back onto my cup. So see how I'm pulling a little bit of this color over to the right? I'm going to go ahead and bring some more of this over to the left, simply because even though there is reflected light over here, it's still darker than this side of the cup. So while this is drying, I'm going to mix up some more of my paint because I evidently misjudged and did not make enough. So I'm going to set this to the side and let it dry. But something I want to do is zoom out just a touch. And I want you to look at the cup and tell me if you can't tell that it's starting to take on a little bit of shape. So you see the first wash is where we're going to get our base color in and our lights, and then now we're working toward our darkest darks. So this needs to dry, and I'll see you back here in just a second. That wash is nice and dry. So this time, instead of wetting the whole thing, I'm going to wet a little area, and then the rest of it I'm going to paint wet on dry. So right around in here is where the transition starts to happen between where all the light is hitting the cup on the right side and where it gradually starts going dark on the left. Now I'm wetting this whole side, and the reason why is I don't want to end up with any watermarks where if I were just to paint a strip of water down through there, it may leave a watermark and then I'll have to try to fix it, and I don't want to do that. All right, so I'm going to come in here with my first color, the original blue color, which I've recreated that color because I ran out, but I have it at a little bit thicker consistency. As a matter of fact, I've got it a little bit too thick. So I'm going to thin that down just a wee little bit, and I'm going to paint that right down through here. Then I'm going to rinse out that brush, and just with a damp brush, I'm going to lean this up to the right. Again, we're going to let gravity help us out just a wee little bit. Put some of that paint on there, rinse out my brush, take out most of that water, and I just want to really gradually go from the dark into the light. So that's why I'm tilting it up and just using my brush, kind of coax it along. Okay, now I'm going to take some of my darker blue and I'm going to flip my painting around. Sorry about that, but it's easier for me to get my paint where I want it and not have my wrist in a really awkward position. So I'm painting this dark shadow on right here, and I'm allowing that to touch where I left off with the original blue color. I'm going to water this down some, because as it comes over to this side, remember the reflected light is over here from the wall, and I want that to be there. This needs to soften out just a little bit more. Going to run my brush this way to kind of coax things along a little bit. There we go. Uh-oh, I dropped some water there. Let me dab that up real quick. So again, I'm putting this paint down over here, but I'm wanting it to be lighter because of that reflected light that's over here. I may even go back in and grab some of my original blue and put that in there instead of continuing to use the really dark blue. Now, I'm just taking my brush, I'm just doing this little zigzag number right here, because I want to get a nice even transition from one to the other. I can always come in here and get a little bit more of this darker color, and the reason that I can do that is because the surface of my paper is still nice and wet. I'm going to tilt my board up just a wee little bit, put some of this darker paint on, because the shadow does get fairly intense just right about here. So I'm just adding a little bit more saturation and excuse me, and value by adding a little bit more paint while I have the chance. I've taken that out of my brush. Can lay this back down. Can wiggle my brush back and forth just to distribute it a little bit better. And I know that I've got an uneven bottom. I'm going to fix that in just a minute. I'm going to turn this cup this way and smooth that bottom out. There we are. Okay, now I'm going to turn this around, and I want you to see that we have this nice transition from a really light area going into a darker area. Well, I was going to try to lift some color out, but this has gotten almost dry, so I'm not going to fool with it. I can always lift out a little bit of color after it dries if I need to. So let me get this dry. We'll come back and take a look at it, see if the values are where they need to be, if it's looking like a round cup, and go from there. I think we can do just a little bit more here. I'm going to thin down my darker color paint, just adding some water to it. Now I'm going to take some of this. I'm just going to paint it on right here. So this is nice and soupy here, more like a coffee wash. I'm going to rinse that out, and now I'm going to do the same thing with my original color, in that I'm going to get it nice and soupy. It almost looks the same, doesn't it? I can thin that down some more if I want. And now I've just got a clean, wet brush, and I can run this clean water just right down through here. Going to get a little more of this paint. I'm picking up some of the thicker consistency back here. Going to drop that in right there. It's still very liquidy, but it's not super thick. Okay, then I have to turn this way. I'm going to go into my original color, run that right along beside it, and let it lighten up going this direction. I've got almost like a little stripe there, and I don't want that. So I'm going to add a little more of my darker color. Uh-oh, I'm just going to push that back with my finger. Now I don't want to do too much here, because if I keep going, I'm going to end up having a mess because it's trying to dry over here. So I'm just taking my brush that I have rinsed and dried off and just smoothing some of this paint out and pulling it in this direction a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. It's starting to get streaky because everything is trying to dry really, really quick. And I'll come back and I'm just going to do a tea wash all over the whole thing, just so that I can get rid of any of these streaky looking marks. But I can't do it right now because my paper is at that stage between being damp and dry where boo-boos can happen. Okay, this is looking pretty good. One thing that I do want to do is I want to pull a little bit of color out right here. So I'm just taking my brush with clean water and I'm running it right down through here, and then just dabbing it with the paper towel just to take a little bit of that color back out. Now, in order to get this looking more smooth and really a nice wash of color, I am coming in here with a lot of water and creating a very more water than paint consistency here. Then I'm going to take that and just do a wash all over the whole cup, just like you would if you were wetting it. See how that starts to make everything just kind of melt together. And you may notice that I'm brushing on this color in a little bit of a bowl-like stroke, and that is to help it look even rounder. When I used to oil paint, and even in watercolor and acrylics too, to help something look more realistic, especially in oils and acrylics, you always wanted to put your strokes down the way that, if you were doing a plant, the way that the plant grew. It just helped with the realism. I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of my darker color because I'm losing some of that effect here. I'm going to run some down through while my surface is still damp. Okay, so I'm liking what I have right now. And turn this way. Just take a lightly damp brush and run it down through there. Just pull up a little bit more of that color. Let me get a clean paper towel so that I can show you what this does. So I've got a damp brush, not a soaking wet brush. I'm just going to run this brush right down through here and see it's picking up a little bit of color because I want that reflected light to show over on this side. And then I'll rinse my brush and come back down through here. Wipe that color out and just do this until I feel comfortable with the effect that I have, or until it gets to a point where my paint and paper is saying, okay, that's enough, stop. I'm going to do the same thing over here. A damp brush. Wipe off a little bit of excess. Okay, that's not perfectly straight, so I'm afraid it's going to throw things off if I don't get this shadow line a little bit straighter. See this little line right here? That's what I'm talking about when I say I don't want to get a water line. So I'm going to smooth this out with a damp brush. Okay, better. And I need to lift some more out over here, but again, it's at that stage where I don't need to mess with it. We are finished with this cup as far as putting in its shadow, but there are a couple of highlights that run right down through here, and I don't want to not include those. So I'm going to use my Rosemary & Co. Series 502 brush, and it is a stiff bristled brush. I don't know how well you can see that. This is my smallest one. This is the size 2, but the bristles on it, it's a square or a flat top brush, and the bristles are stiff, and it makes a great brush for lifting out color. So one of those highlights is just about right here. It comes over to the right a little bit, so I'm just getting my brush damp with some clean water. I'm going to run that this way and then dab that up. Then it turns, comes down this way. See how that's lifting out paint? And it's going to look like where the sun was coming through the window, and this reflection, because I took this picture, I know where it was coming from, it was bouncing off the floor in my studio because the sun was coming through the window and shining right on the floor and then bouncing off the floor and going right up to the cup. Let's see if I can't get that a little bit lighter right up there. Okay, so I've got that one in. Now there's a second one right beside it. And it does basically the same thing. Actually, these two connect right up here at the top of the cup. And this one turns and starts coming down the cup. It doesn't get quite as bright as the one beside it. It fades out a little bit and then it picks back up again down here. So that looks good. I've got a little bit of the reflected light over here. Now what I'm going to do while it's on my mind is I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup work, see around here where I got maybe a little bit of paint outside where it needed to go, and I'm just using this same brush, getting it wet, and then picking up any of the little uh-ohs that happened along the way. There's one up here at the top. And this also can help straighten up any edges that don't look great. Here is the final painting. I went ahead and added a shadow, and if you're interested in learning how to paint shadows, I can always do a demo on that too. This was a very faint shadow, so there doesn't need to be a lot of color there, but there's enough that it grounds the cup and makes it look like it's actually sitting on something.